I'm going to if Jen Kolodner can unmute herself and Rick Goldstein can make sure he's unmuted, and everybody else, please stay muted for now. So the first thing I want to say is that we're recording this because a lot of people couldn't make it and they asked that it be recorded. So just so that you know, it's recorded. I had originally thought that there'd be like 4 or 5 people on this call. And so I had a little bit of a different format scheduled for today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to present some information, and Jen and I will kind of have a conversation about it. But I want to hear what everybody says. The best way to do that is in the chat. So type questions at any point in there. I will keep an eye on it, but Rick is going to be also my eyes for that and speak up and say, Kate, here's a very important question you missed. So if we're all okay with that, because right now we're at 17 participants, and I am assuming we're going to grow a little bit more, and that just becomes unwieldy to have too much interaction on Zoom that way. So we're going to do it this way. Can I get a couple of thumbs up for that's okay with everyone? Everything. Thank you, everyone. Lovely. It's great to see all these faces. A lot of familiar ones and a lot of new ones to me, at least. So I'll start by introducing myself since I don't know everybody on the call. I'm Kate Forrest, and I am the life cycle officiant at Folkshul. I have been a member of Folkshul for 15 years and been on staff there for 14. I was the 7th grade teacher first, and for I think 4 or 5 years now. I don't know, Jen, can you remember when I started doing the bar mitzvahs? That sounds about right. I have also worked at the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, which is the education arm of our movement. And I am almost done with the program there to be a certified Madrika life cycle officiant. I'm not really sure what the title is. What I'm going to present today is a lot of information actually from the dean of the Institute, Rabbi Adam Shalom. This is based on a class that he taught me. And so I have a PowerPoint slide, which I think I'm just going to scrap because it's just wordy. And I think we're all, you're stuck looking at my face. That's basically what it is. So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to present 8 different questions and some ideas behind them of how would secular humanistic Jews answer these questions? These are questions that sometimes get asked of us. There are people who are confused about what does secular humanistic Jewish mean. And hopefully we'll develop some answers that are comfortable for you so that you can explain it to others, because I think that that's very tough sometimes. You know, people have an idea of what Orthodox Judaism, they have an idea of what Reform Judaism is. That those are things that are familiar, even to non-Jews, they're familiar with those terms. But many people do not know when you say secular humanistic Jew. First of all, that's a mouthful. And second of all, it's not, you know, we're sort of a religious minority amongst minorities. So I think it's important that we have shared language that we are comfortable with in expressing ourselves. It helps to solidify for ourselves what our beliefs are, what our central operating principle is, and then it also helps to explain it to the wider population. So the first question I want to you know, throw out there is who is a Jew? And this is a loaded question. And Jen, before, you know, if someone had asked you who is a Jew, how might you have answered that?
When you say beforehand,
before Folkshul, what might have you have said? Yeah.
So just a little bit about my background.
Yes,
and
please.
Hi to everybody. Most of you already know me, but I probably don't know everybody on the call. And Kate was so kind as to include me in the conversation because for 2 years I was the director of our school. after Mindy and before Beth. And so I've done a lot of thinking about this myself. I grew up in a conservative Jewish household where we kept kosher, and my mother still does. And my grandparents grew up on the Lower East Side. They absolutely kept kosher, but my mother grew up in a home in the 50s where you kept a kosher kitchen, but as my mother would say, our kitchen was kosher, our stomachs weren't. And so when they went outside of the house, they ate whatever they wanted to eat. And that was the way my mother was brought up. My father was told by his father, who was an Austrian Holocaust refugee, that my father had to have a very solid Jewish education, so he knew exactly what it was he was rejecting. And so I had a lot of conservative influences, and then throughout my life, I had my Jewish journey, just like everybody does, where there are times in your life when you feel more connected or less connected or differently connected in different ways. And so my husband is very much an atheist who grew up in a conservative Jewish household, and so he was never happy with any of the Jewish options that we had in front of us. Except he grew up here in the Philadelphia area, and so he grew up with Ed and Dina Lake being part of his extended family, and so he knew his whole life about folk shul. And so when we came back to the area, we made a real decision to come to folk shul. And in fact, when we did, we found about 5 families that used to be at the synagogue that we were at locally with us at the preschool, and they all had dropped off one by one by one. We never knew where they went. And then we came to folk shul, and there they all were. And so
I think folk shul gets the dropouts. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. So I think so that question of who is a Jew, I mean, yeah. I think that it's always been, from my perspective, I've had the conservative answer, and I've had the answer which is meaningful to me. And the answering that's meaningful to me is what I think folk shul really lives by, which is anybody who throws their lot in with the Jewish people is part of the group. Whether right. They call themselves a Jew, they don't call themselves a Jew, if you're willing to stand together with the Jewish community and call yourself part of the community, then I think there's an argument to be made for that definition.
Right. I think that is really what we strive for in our community and in other secular humanistic Jewish communities, is that anyone who chooses to identify with the history, future, and culture of the Jewish people is Jewish. That's sort of like the definition we have on our website and in our literature, right? So this opens the door to many people to come in. This is sometimes very problematic for people who come from a different background, because they have it in their head that your mother has to be Jewish, or at least your father has to be Jewish, or at least some grandparent has to be Jewish, right? But this also opens the door for people to leave and to desist in their Jewish identity. And I think that this can be prickly even for secular humanistic Jews. I think some people feel, well, you can't stop being Jewish, but by our definition, the corollary has to be true, and you can stop being Jewish if you wish. And so I think that's something that if we're going to take the good and the openness of that definition, we also have to take the flip side of it and realize that some people might choose not to identify with the history, future, and culture of the Jewish people, even if in our minds they're Jewish. You know, my mother used to work, she's a social worker, and she used to work for Catholic Charities. And there was a nun that she worked with that she liked very much. She was a very smart woman. And she used to be Jewish. She converted to Catholicism and then took the holy orders. And, you know, Sister Paulette always said that she was only Jewish when she walked into a deli. That was the only time she was still Jewish. There were still parts of her culture that she retained. But so anyway, we don't think that someone has to go that far to convert to be a different religion, that they can just shed that identity. So I think that's something that sometimes we have to come to terms with. I think we like to think of being Jewish as being part of a family. So we would not have a conversion ceremony or a conversion process. We have what's called an adoption process, right? You are adopted into our Jewish family. If someone chooses to join the Jewish community, we say they are adopted in. And if you think about it, it's sort of what you do in your own personal life as well, right? Like when I got married, I joined my husband's family and he joined my family. And so we are constantly adopting new families throughout our life cycle. And so this just makes more sense. I want to ask you, Jen, because this is something interesting that, how do you think we should view Messianic Jews, or sometimes called Jews for Jesus? Because that's a
easy questions. Why don't
well, I mean, I don't have the answer. I just think it's an interesting thing that we should bring up and discuss.
For me, I think that's very thorny. I think it's very thorny because then, especially when you think about what humanism is, secular humanism. And Kate, you can fine tune my definition, please do.
Sure.
But I think of it as being able to think rationally about tremendously irrational parts of human life. I mean, religion and culture and experience are deeply, deeply emotional, and they're deeply heartfelt. And so there's a lot that is not rational about our cultural experiences and our religious experiences and our spiritual beliefs and the ways we interact with the universe.
Right.
And so, but one of the things that humanism attempts to do is to allow people to think about where they are, as opposed to just accepting where they are and what has been given to them as an accident of birth. Right. And so so when you ask a question that is so that really gets at some real sore points for people, you get into that issue of the thousands of years of wanting to believe that our culture is enough, and thousands of years of being told by other cultures that it's not enough. And so, but at the same time, you have this desire to let people explore their own experience on their own and choose something that is meaningful to them. So it's very hard to say to someone, you are wrong. Your experience of this interaction between Jewish history, culture, religion, and the Christian outcropping from that long history, that the way you have brought it together is wrong.
Right.
That's problematic from a
human
standpoint. So
it is.
You may notice I'm not answering your question.
And I don't think there is. I mean, for me, I don't feel that I can shut the door on anyone, because I would never want anyone to shut the door on me, or my children, who are in an intercultural family. I never want anyone to tell me I'm not Jewish enough.
You're about to say, but
I don't have the only but is I'm sensitive, as you are, to people's history of Jews are, okay, so whether you consider Messianic Jews or not, they certainly are not secular. Certainly they are not secular, for sure. I would absolutely agree with Alana in that way. They are not secular. But could they be part of the Jewish family? I don't want to be the arbiter of who's a Jew and who's not a Jew. If you tell me you're Jewish, I'm not going to check under the hood for anything, as they say, you know, that's not my business. But I think it's important because these are questions these are things that people have asked me. I did a presentation at Knesset Israel on Secular Humanistic Judaism, and someone asked me this question: well, how do you feel about this? And I'm giving you the answer I gave them. And I think it's important that if we're going to be able to talk about our beliefs and our definition of Judaism, to at least think about these things a little bit. And to live our value. If our value is you identify with the history, future, and culture of the Jewish people, then that's our value. Yeah, but I am sensitive to how difficult that could be to accept that definition.
So I'm gonna add one thing, and that is, I have been part of a discussion group on Facebook that Kate is part of as well, which you're all welcome. If you're on Facebook, you should join the Humanistic Judaism discussion group. I get no kickbacks. It's a free group. Yeah. And it's a terrific discussion group. I think there are several thousand people now in the group. And the idea is it's a place to talk about secular humanistic Judaism. And one of the things that has come up in that group, and Kate, I think this gets to what you're talking about here, is also someone asked, how can I convert to being secular humanistic as a Jew? Like, if you started as a Jew, that's one thing. If you began your life with a different culture or no religious tradition, how do you become part of it? And it's like you were saying, just like people can choose to leave or choose to come, is there a ritual? Is there a process by which that happens?
Okay, that's a great question. So Folkshul hasn't in the past had a ceremony like this, but many other secular and humanistic Jewish communities throughout North America do, and it's called an adoption ceremony. And usually the person who's being adopted into the Jewish community will do some reading, have a little bit of education, just so that they kind of know what they're getting into. And then, have a short little thing in front of the community to welcome them into the community and to become a part of it. So we don't call it a conversion, we really call it an adoption, because we view it as a family. Yeah.
And does anybody require that in any way?
No, I don't think it's never required in any of these communities. I think it's a nice way to welcome someone. A lot of times people join the communities, and Folkshul we do it usually at Sukkot. When we have new families, we welcome new families to come up and, be introduced to the community. So it's just a way to welcome them into the community. Yeah. Yeah.
Kate, can I interrupt? Somebody in the text said, if you are a Messianic Jewish, but you're not secular, would you still be like adopted in?
Yeah. Well, I would like to think that we would adopt, anyone who feels that this is a good home for them. I'm thinking, though, that if you do have some beliefs in the divinity of Christ, this probably isn't a great fit for you. Not because we don't want you, but because you're not going to find probably anyone else who also believes in the divinity of almost anything, let alone the divinity of Christ. So it might not be the most comfortable fit, but certainly that person could be considered Jewish. I wouldn't, like I said, I don't close the door on people.
I'd love it if we adopted one, because then I would get a much different perspective on.
Right. Yeah, it is.
Right?
And sometimes it is fun. I mean, I sometimes get the opportunity to go to different, and Jen did too as director, to go to different events where there are Jews from all different walks of life. And it's great to to interact and to be able to represent our movement and to learn about what's going on in other parts of the Jewish world. So yeah, I love those kinds of events. I want to move on to the next question with one quick thing, and that is, you know, in terms of who is a Jew, I just wanted to mention one thing about intermarriage. Intermarriage, and we tend to call it intercultural marriage rather than interfaith marriage because we don't use words like faith. But intercultural marriage can actually be a positive thing for the children in an intercultural marriage, meaning that, and I'm speaking from personal experience, that the Jewish partner becomes more intentional in their Jewish practice. And by me marrying someone who wasn't Jewish, I had to really think, why am I doing these things? Why do I think these things? Why do I believe these things? And that made me much more intentional in raising our kids and deciding what to share in terms of raising kids and educating kids.
I find that interesting you said that, because that's exactly what my approach became. You know, my wife is very, very Catholic. Yeah. And, you know, so integrating our lives together has been a marvelous experience. And so, but I do find myself being much more intentional about Judaism in this house, whereas before we had children, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't as pronounced from my perspective. I totally agree with that. Absolutely.
And just to introduce everyone to Rob Wexler, president of our board. No, I want everybody to know who you are. And probably it makes you more intentional than if your partner had been Jewish, right? If you marry another, then you're just going to go through the steps without thinking about it, and it forces you to be more critical.
Yep. Okay. Yep. It's been a great experience.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. Okay, so then the next question that I frequently get is, do you believe in God? Right. So this is a good one. So our movement is a secular movement, and we tend to focus on the positive aspects of human responsibility. But I think that probably even within Volksschule, we have some hardcore atheists. We have people who would consider themselves agnostic, maybe we have some people who are deists, who have some thought about a power or something that started the universe. We probably don't have many people who believe in a supernatural being who's listening to our prayers and intervening on our behalf. When I get asked this question, I always say that I'm post-atheist, that to me, I'm going to spend my time thinking about things that I can control, things that happen in this world. What can I do to protect the earth and those who live upon it? But I do think that there is room for a bit of a range when we say secular. I wondered, Jennifer, if you had any thoughts about that. You mentioned your husband was a hardcore atheist.
Oh, yeah, sure. So both of my children went to a synagogue preschool, and my husband, despite being very much an atheist, has taught Hebrew school and has been on a synagogue board. And, you know, because we really do believe that you bloom where you're planted, and you try to figure out how you can find community that best fits you. And so it takes a while. And I think most of us find as adults that your own identity in any capacity, in any facet of your life, is a journey and is constantly changing. And so I would say that we're probably atheist, agnostic mostly, but I haven't always been throughout my life. But the story that I always like to tell is that my husband was walking our younger son home from synagogue preschool one day, and our son turned to my husband and said, "How come God's invisible?" And my husband said, "Oh, that's easy. He doesn't exist." And I thought to myself, well, that's not really how I would have handled that question. But, you know, okay. You know, I think it was honest for our family, my husband, and I think that that's really sort of the sensibility that my children have grown up with, and why I think folkshul was a very good fit for us by the time we had kids, because it just, we didn't have to make excuses and do a lot of pretending. Whereas I think I grew up with a lot of trying things on. I belonged to a conservative youth group and an Orthodox youth group, and I was trying on a lot of things, but then realizing that they didn't really fit who I was, especially as I was getting to see more and more of the world.
Right. I think a lot of times when you say, you know, to someone that you don't believe in God, some people are very taken aback and very upset by this, and it can be upsetting to explain that to someone, and
especially to your parents.
Especially to your parents, for sure. It could be depending on who your parents are. And so to be able to, and we're going to get to some other questions that might help in further explaining that to someone. And you don't want to necessarily, I mean, depending on the person, you might want to make them feel more comfortable with your answer. And some of them, you might want them to feel uncomfortable with your answer. It depends who your audience is, who you're talking to. Rick, there were a lot of
there's a lot of chatting, but not so much questions for the general order. More just statements, responses, stupid jokes. That's mine.
Okay, Rick has a stupid joke. Okay.
But if a probing question comes up, I will be sure to interrupt.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. So this brings me to the next question, which is about spirituality. People will ask, well, if you don't believe in God, are you spiritual? And I like to think that I am spiritual, because when I think of the word spiritual, I think of the word inspiration. It also has the same root of the word respiration, right? Breath. I think of the human spirit and uplifting the human spirit. I think of joy and enthusiasm. I think of being part of something bigger than myself. I was at the Women's March the day after the inauguration in 2017, and that was inspiring. And that was a spiritual experience for me. I can know intellectually that I'm experiencing a wave of oxytocin and serotonin in my brain, right? I can know that that's what's happening. I can understand that. Or I can choose to be in the moment, and whether it's enjoying music, holding someone's hand, looking at a gorgeous view from a mountaintop. Although, let's be honest, I've never hiked to the top of any mountain. I would be looking across a beach. That would be more my speed, right? I can choose to be in the moment and experience the spirituality and the inspiration of that moment without having to worry about the chemical reaction. So, Jen, would you consider yourself a spiritual person?
Again, I would say that there are times in my life when I had a deeply spiritual connection to my Jewish culture. But looking back on it now, I think it was really a deeply warm connection to community, to culture, to history, to being part of a group doing the same thing together in a similar way, and in a similar way to what had been done for hundreds or thousands of years previously. So that warm feeling that you get in your chest, you can interpret in a lot of different ways. And so I was just writing in the chat that, you know, you mentioned spirit and inspiration, but in Hebrew, similarly, you have the word ruach, and Amichai can correct me because he knows a lot more than I do. But in my understanding, the word ruach can also be interpreted in a lot of different ways. So there's sort of that spirit in a supernatural sense. There's spirit in the sort of, yay, go team. Like, we've got Ruach, yes we do, we've got Ruach, how about you, you know? And then it can also mean breath. And so there really is that same sort of connection, as has been explained to me. So Amichai is going to correct me if I've gotten any of that wrong.
You're fine.
Okay, good. Yeah. And if if you think about it, this is, even if you look at like old cave paintings, Rabbi Adam pointed this out once, that, there are some old cave paintings where it's just a person's handprint, and it's like, I was here, here's a person, and you think, my gosh, I'm a human too, and that's very inspiring to think of the chain of humanity that we are all a part of. And so I'm reading a fabulous book now about, Korean immigrants, and it's a novel, but it's very, it's touching me, and I find myself tearing up. And I'm not sure that there's any less spirit in this book than in Torah stories, which can also be very moving, right? I think the human spirit, and so if the human spirit is there, to me, that's spiritual. And that's how that's how I feel like I can say I'm spiritual without believing in supernatural. I think that's just the language that we use. So then another question that I get a lot of is, well, then what's the meaning of life? What's the purpose? Why are you here? And I answer that, why is there one purpose to life? Right? Why does life have one purpose? My purpose to life might not be the same as yours. I know that the purpose to my life was different when I was 25 than it is now at 50. And I get to define the meaning for my life. And that's the beauty of having this critical thinking. It's harder work, I think. What do you? Oh, some of the caves in France. Jen, did you want to say something about the purpose of life, or where?
Sorry, just answering your question.
Yeah.
I think that folk shul's approach is very much one that I think resonates for a lot of us, which is that concept of one of the reasons for human beings and Jews, and again, this is an overstatement, I'm sure, but one of the reasons for being here on this planet would be to make the world a better place for having had us in it. Yeah. And so that goes along with the concepts of repairing the world, the concepts of social justice that folk shul really tries to embrace. I think that resonates for a lot of us who consider ourselves secular humanist, because that's still really important. And it's you don't need religion to have morality. And a lot of people rely on the moral teachings that come from their religion. But what a lot of secular humanists believe is that morality is separate from religion. There may, and ideally it will be, a large overlap between the two, but they are not the same thing. And so you can have one without the other.
Exactly, and that actually gets to the next question, which is, how can you have ethics without God? Right? And I think it was Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller who said, I've done all the murdering and raping I want to do so far, and it's none, right? And there's, you know, I like to think that we come from a place of enlightened self-interest, right? Humans work in a society because we find ways to get along despite our religious differences and despite the different religious lines that we draw in the sand. And it's not the law that keeps us from doing bad. It's not the legal law that, you know, the government laws that keep us from doing bad. And it's not even the religious law that keeps us from doing bad. It's an enlightened self-interest. Cultures, I don't think it's coincidence that cultures across the world that have developed, you know, independently, don't murder and steal from each other, that they've all developed basically those same sorts of laws and rules. I think what people do is then they take the label of God and religion and they put it on that to say, aha, here's why you should do it. But if you really deconstruct it, there's no difference between, you know, like you can look at Confucianism and Western thought, and there's a lot of similar taboos against murder and rape and theft, right? And treating each other with kindness. Felix Adler, who you know, trained as a rabbi but founded the humanist movement in America, he said, when you elicit the best in others, you elicit the best in yourselves. And so if you think about that, that kind of encapsulates our thought, that we are fulfilling our highest potential when we help someone else fulfill their highest potential. And that's how we know when we're doing right, whatever that is. Did you have any thoughts on that?
I'm sure that a lot of people have a lot of thoughts on that. I'm hoping that we'll see some of that in the chat and
do some questions.
And then maybe there's some, you know, this is a good point to stop and see if anyone wants to join the discussion. So again, just for anyone who joined us a little bit late, we determined that it might be easier to have most people on mute most of the time, just because of the technological limitations of having 20 people talking all at once. But that doesn't mean Kate and I are the only ones who can talk.
That's right. That's right. So I'd love to hear at this point, before we go on, some people's thoughts about how might you respond to someone who says, do you believe in God? How do you have ethics without God? How can you be, 20 air conditioners can get noisy? Yes, that's absolutely. And, you know, because that's really what I hope that we get out of this, is that not only do we define it for ourselves, but so that we can all go out in the world confident with language to say proudly, I'm a secular humanistic Jew and this is what it means. And we don't have to say it's, well, I don't believe in God, but I'm Jewish, right? It's not, you don't want to be this, but we want to be, you know, just to define it in a positive way. So, all right, that's okay too. All right, so we'll move on a little bit.
Yeah. I used to say that I don't believe in God, but I'm not against God. I mean, if somebody wants to believe in God, it's their choice. It's a part of our values, but to accept that other people have different beliefs. So this is part, is actually define us better. I mean, we don't say that we have the right answers. We just say what the positive side, what we believe. So you say we don't need a God to tell us what's right or what's wrong. Then we can determine that ourselves. We don't need anybody outside to tell us. Or there's no punishment. It's not, we don't do it because there's a punishment. It's just we do it because it's the right thing to do.
Right. I like what you said too, Amakai, about not being against God. We're not anti-God. We're not, you know, and that if you know, we're not trying to tell anyone else they are wrong. And I think that actually is important, because there is a lot of literature out there from, you know, militant atheists. I don't know how else to describe it. But there were some books published a few years ago by some authors who really, you know, want to convince everybody else that they're wrong. And that's not a humanist practice, right? That might be a secular belief, but it's not a humanist practice. A humanist practice would be accepting people for their beliefs. Yeah.
No, we like to welcome the conversation. I like to believe that we all, as a community, like to welcome the conversation about it, and not necessarily have to steer anybody in one direction or another at all. I think that we are all good like that. Every conversation I've ever had with anybody in our community about something on this level has never been, you know, well, I'm correct and you're incorrect, or this is what I believe and that's it. I think that there's room for interpretation, and I think that there's much more room for acceptance from our side, and that's a little bit of a difference between us and other organizations, other communities like us.
Right. Right.
The word atheist, coming from Hebrew, I thought it's okay to say I'm atheist, but when I learned in the United States that they have some negative connotation, and people think that if you say you're atheist, you're actually anti-God, or we don't expect you to believe in God.
No, that's right. We're a Christian nation, and so that gets difficult, very difficult.
It does. And I think especially in this current political climate, people think that if you disagree with them, you can't possibly accept them.
That's exactly
very
right.
little, you know, so I would love for us to be the loving, inclusive non-theists rather than the angry, battle-ready atheists. So
amen, if I could say that.
Amen, a secular amen. Yes, Judith Side's book is fabulous, God Optional. Yeah, Rabbi Judith Side, she's also from the Institute, and her book God Optional is great. So I recommend that. That was just put up in the chat. Yeah, good.
The comment that I'd like to make is that the thing that bothers me the most when I think about myself as a secular humanist Jew is that I feel that there are a lot of Jews, particularly the Orthodox conservative, who may not accept me as Jewish. That's the thing I worry. And I haven't had too many experiences like that, but I do have concerns about whether, I'm certainly aware that for instance, the Jewish Exponent has not included us in a lot of stuff over the years. And that's a concern that I feel.
I think that's a really valid concern. I think we actually face more problems being accepted by the wider Jewish world than we do by non-Jews. If you go to any of your, and I hate to use the word non-Jews because it's like such an othering thing, but if you go to people outside the Jewish community and you say, I'm Jewish, no one's going to question you or question, are you Jewish enough? Are you really Jewish? How Jewish are you? Like, you know, like there's a thermometer that we can measure our Jewishness by. But that certainly does happen within the Jewish community. There's always a thermometer. Well, he's not really Jewish. He's just a little Jewish. Like I remember when I think someone, an aunt said this to one of my cousins who was dating someone. Well, is he very Jewish? You don't want to date someone who's very Jewish, right?
Right.
And right, and because that'll give you all kinds of problems if you date a very Jewish guy, and it's I like to think that it's not a continuum or you know, and I also sometimes shy away from the idea that there is a continuum, you know, like the Orthodox are here, and then over here is conservative, and then maybe Reconstruction, and then Reform, and then Renewal, like whatever it is. I don't like to think of it like that either, because that puts it on a most Jewish to least Jewish. I don't I like to think of it more as a tree with different branches, and each branch comes off the trunk just as much, right? So there's a conservative branch and the secular humanist branch, but the trunk is the history of the Jewish people. And yeah, Jen.
One of the things that's been very interesting for me since I've been at Folkshul is the acceptance that I have found with Quakers, Unitarian Universalists, and Jesuit educated lapsed Catholics. So those three groups really understand the importance of, first of all, the importance of tikkun olam and the importance of menschlichkeit. So the idea that being a good person and being part of what helps repair the world is of the utmost importance. And I think that what's interesting is that you can find allies within other religious traditions. I mean, it takes a little bit of looking sometimes. And I think similarly, you can find allies within the Jewish tradition. It's just people sometimes encounter the secular humanist Jewish stance as somehow challenging them and their identity, and whether or not you mean it to. Whereas I think people who are not Jewish don't sort of, they're not what, we all have our own baggage and we all have different baggage. So it's just a different,
right. I think, yeah, people who are not Jew, who are outside the Jewish community, they don't have an investment in defining what a Jew is or who is a Jew or the right way to be Jewish. And if we can come from a place of not being defensive, then that maybe helps others to also, you know, and I always say, stay curious, not furious. That's always my approach, right? Like, well, tell me about your Jewish experience. And if you open it up, then they're open to also asking you. And I think, you know, I'd like to move on to the next question, because I think this kind of gets into it a little bit. But a lot of people have said to me, well, you know, you're rejecting all the tradition, you're rejecting this religion, but isn't that what's kept the Jewish people alive and together and survival? Isn't that the core of Jewish survival? I mean, they tried to exterminate us at this point and at this point, right? Like, you know, our history is littered with that. But I think, from my point of view, I think it's just the opposite, right? I think that it is our flexibility, our adaptability, our the fact that we're not tied, we have not been tied to a specific land at certain times, that we have been able to, become part of other cultures and lands, that it's a testament to human responsibility and effort. Because we've been able to assimilate to a degree to exist. And so it's in fact, to me, it proves the opposite, that it's because of human effort that we have survived. And Jen, you had a question, comment?
No, just that also that willingness to argue, question, explore is fundamental to the Jewish tradition in many different ways, and deeply, deeply embedded. I think, though, the importance, and this is something that Mindy and I have talked about at various different times, the importance is that in order to be, that questioning is acceptable within the Jewish experience. However, in order to be taken seriously, you have to be starting from a point of knowledge. Like I was saying, my grandfather said he wanted my father to fully understand what Judaism was, so he knew what it was he was rejecting. I think there are a lot of people who will have a hard time taking the secular humanist Jewish experience seriously if we don't back it up with some knowledge.
Yes.
And so that can mean being part of a community and exploring what community means to you. It can mean reading books. It doesn't have to. It can mean having both a sense of what Jewish tradition is from many different perspectives, as well as what you want your Jewish tradition to be and why. Because I think if we walk into something and we say, we don't believe in God, we don't keep kosher, we do whatever we want to do, and we think, you know, and then someone comes to you and asks you questions, and then you open your mouth and you have nothing substantive to say back.
Right.
It's hard for someone to take your stance and your experience seriously, even if they, you know, even if they're trying to give you the benefit of the doubt. I think it's important for people to be knowledgeable. And Kate, you and I have talked about this in the context of the B'nai Mitzvah ceremony. Ignorance is not a culture.
Right.
Ignorance is not a community. Knowledge is a very important thing.
Exactly. Exactly. It's so important to have that language ready, not to defend yourself, but so that you feel confident and secure in your identity as a secular humanistic Jew. And that makes it attractive option for people.
May I make a comment?
Please, Art.
Because I'm not so, when I hear you say that, Jen, my own gut response is it's not knowledge, but it's experience. I don't know how many of us in the folk shul community, how much, some of us have a lot of knowledge, but not everybody does, and we come from different backgrounds. I think it's the experience that is the thing that is the most, that creates a sense of community and purpose and values. So I would use that for
I agree 100%. And I believe that that's a very good dichotomy too. Experience is truly the opposite of ignorance. And is certainly the best enemy to ignorance when we're talking about combating a lot of social ills too.
Right. And being able to take those experiences and put them into words that can, you know, to communicate those experiences to others, to say, here's why this experience was meaningful to me. Here's I went to Rosh Hashanah service, you know, and here's how it was so meaningful to me, even with the absence of, you know, some of the things that I've had in my past or what you would expect to see. There was so much else there, you know, you didn't miss anything, right? Because of the reflection, because of the, you know, whatever was meaningful for you there, to be able to describe that. I think it's really important to have the language to be able to do that. Yeah.
Kate,
yes.
It's Mindy. Can I say?
Mindy's raising her hand. Hi, Mindy.
I had to turn it on because I could step in for a minute. So I'm sorry I'm not totally attentive, but in any case, I really feel like we have to be careful when we are talking to so many people who come into our world who really don't have a Jewish background. Right. And they want to be part of our community, and we don't want them to feel like they're not knowledgeable yet.
Right.
And they're not experienced yet.
Right.
And we have to make sure that we're very open and welcoming, and you know, so we don't turn people away.
Oh, of course.
And I'm really sure, and I can't say this, we've done this intentionally because we're all normally aware of it, but I'm sure there's been a lot of spouses who don't really feel comfortable. And we try, you know, as hard as we can, we try, and I'm sure the family has come to whatever terms they come to at some point. But for the most, I mean, we just want to keep it real, that we understand that these people don't have the background. You know, we may be rejecting something in Judaism, but they're just new to Judaism.
Right.
So.
Right.
I don't think you should say rejecting something with Judaism. As Kate said before, we're rejecting some religious part of Judaism. So I wouldn't say, don't, I have to learn what you're rejecting, but you're rejecting maybe the religious part. So the language is important in that case. We don't reject Judaism. We're rejecting maybe some religious belief that we don't believe in, but it doesn't mean that we don't. So don't confuse the two. It seems like even in our conversation internally, we confuse the two.
Right, right. And I think it's important to not think about rejecting. I think of the Jewish experience as an inheritance. You know, this is also something that Rabbi Adam talks about. It's an inheritance that we have, right? And so if you inherit a trunk from your grandmother, and you know, it's full of all kinds of things, paintings and objects and whatever. Some of those things look great in your house and you want to display them and use them, and some of them not so much, and you maybe keep them in the trunk to remember her by, but it's not something that you use in your house. So Judaism is the same way. There are things that we embrace and use. Jen mentioned, you know, Tikkun Olam, and you know, certainly there are a lot of traditions and history and parts of the culture. And then there are some things that, you know, frankly, we don't want to embrace anymore. Certainly some parts of Rabbinic Judaism that are not egalitarian for women. Certainly, you know, the history of different Jewish practices that don't welcome LGBTQ folks. And certainly, you know, there's plenty of things in the Torah that we would say don't fit with our modern sensibilities. So that doesn't mean that's not part of the Jewish history. Were there slaves? Yeah, but that's not a part that we still want to celebrate and embrace right now. So so if we think about it that way, it's not rejecting or accepting. It's that we take what is useful to us, and what isn't, we say, yeah, that's part of our history. It's not part of our present and our future. So yeah, so I think that and to Mindy's point about, you know, always being mindful that not everybody, even you know, I mean, I grew up as a secular Jew, right? So a lot of times I find myself having to Google things that people who went to Reform or conservative synagogues kind of know, right? But you know, my mother went to a folk shul in New York, right? So there are a lot of things that I don't know, you know. So I'm not very at home. Like if I go to a friend's child's bar mitzvah, that doesn't feel like home to me. I don't, you know, I understand when the ark, you know, is open and the Torah comes out. I've seen it, I've been through it, but that's not a familiar thing to me as a secular Jew. Okay. Let's see.
Sorry, on this note, I want to say good evening. I have a board meeting that I need to listen to see what my son is going to do next year. But thank you very much. This is fantastic. Yep, thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
May I make a comment?
Mark's going to make a comment, yes.
I was thinking as you were speaking, as we were talking, it seems to me that the thing that brings us together in the secular humanist group is our connection to Jewish tradition and different ways in which we connect with it. It's not what we don't do. I mean, I understand that's important, but it's what we do connect to, and that's the tradition. And I have my sense is that that's what brings us together and keeps us together, is the community that surrounds the appreciation of tradition that we experience and feel good about.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you. So just some people have to leave early, and some people are just joining us now. I see this is being recorded, so if you miss either the first part or this last part, we can all catch up later. So another question that I get is, well, why do you bother to call yourself a Jew, right? Why aren't you just American? Why don't you just say, you you know, you're secular or you're humanist. Why, if you're not going to practice the Jewish religion, why are you going to call yourself a Jew? And you know, I think that there's many different ways you could answer this, but there's something about being human that makes us want to know where we came from, right? A lot of adoptions now are open adoptions, because it was just found that so many people are searching for their birth families. If you can't you can't go anywhere without tripping over an ad for 23andMe. I don't think that it's a choice that you have to make between either or. I can be Jewish and American. My kids are Jewish and Irish. I can be, I'm Jewish. I'm also a social worker. I'm also a mother. Like, there's lots of parts of my identity. I don't have to be, I'm never just one thing. I wonder if anybody has thoughts about how they identify themselves, and knowing that we are also more than our DNA, you know. One of the 23andMe ads had this guy, and he was wearing like a lederhosen or something. He was like, I was sure I was German. I always was told I was German, but when I took the DNA test, I found out I was Scottish or Irish. And then you see him in a kilt. And all I think about is, you know, he just gave up part of his identity. He grew up his whole life thinking he was part of one culture. And somehow his DNA test made him change his mind about the group he belonged to. I'm not sure why that was. I like to think that we can transcend our DNA a little bit.
Can I say something? Hi.
Please.
I don't know you, but okay. Marjorie Goldman, and I was the bar and bat mitzvah coordinator some generations back, and hello to my old friends. I'm so happy to see you here. I do like the what we say at those events, that, you know, we do it to honor our tradition, and our culture and our tradition, and as a rite of passage. I don't remember the exact wording. You'd think I would have it down after saying it so many times. But certainly for me, it's always been a very strong connection to my grandparents who were immigrants, and Yiddishkeit was a very important part of it for me. And Jordan Kutzik wrote a great thing. I hope you all read it. It got posted on the website about, you know, and I have a friend who keeps bugging me, we should go to Israel. You got to go to Israel. How come you haven't gone to Israel? And, you know, it's not like I'm refusing to go to Israel, but I never thought of that as home. You know, I think of the Lithuanian shtetl as a homeland and anything, you know. So, and that's a secular experience. You know, it has to do with prayer and ritual, although prayer and ritual certainly came out in my, you know, I would see it and I would hear it. And it's that sense of connection that I think would be terribly lost if we couldn't organize as a community. And of course, Max Rosenfeld's vote, you may have said it already. Sure. I was sure they started at 7 o'clock, that the secular Jew needs a community just as much as a religious Jew does. So, you know,
for sure. Yeah, definitely having the community and having the experience helps you to define it for yourself and to define it for others, to have that language, to be able to explain, you know, to yourself and to other Jews, mostly is what we were saying. I want to get to one more question that sometimes people ask me, and that is, well, can't God mean just anything you want? Why, you know, and I think, you know, you see this a lot in the Reconstructionist service, that they say, well, when we say God, we really mean nature. Well, that's fine, except we have a really good word for nature, and it's nature, right? And so as secular humanists, we want to be authentic in what we say. So that words just don't mean whatever you want them to mean. I mean, unless you're writing poetry. And so we change our blessings and our wordings and our songs to be consistent with our beliefs. And there's always a push-pull when Jews reinvent things between continuity and integrity, right? So I think of the song that we sing, Naaseh Shalom, like we will make peace, right? We keep most of the words the same. We keep the melody, the music the same, and that's continuity. But we change a few key things so that it is we are bringing peace, right? We are making the peace, and that is where our integrity comes in, right? So we're not going to say something that we don't mean, just for the sake of continuity. That we can change enough so that when we say it, we can mean it, we can feel it, we can be inspired by it, we can have a spiritual moment with it, at the same time as touching on our past and taking something for the sake of continuity.
I'm going to jump in and
yes,
just bring one thing up, though.
Please.
I've been to a good number of B'nai Mitzvot at Folkshul, yeah. And one thing I found very interesting, and this was relevant when both of my sons had their bar mitzvahs as well at Folkshul, and that is that while we're comfortable replacing a lot of our wording, the one area where a lot of families go back to the traditional is the Shehechianu. Yeah. And that the Shehechianu in its traditional form feels right because it is a connection on our most important days to other most important days and days when important people were there with us. So a lot of us make these exceptions because a prayer or anything we say is two things. It's the words we say and it's the feeling that we have. And those are they can be two very different things, but they can both be important. And so I might blanch at the English translation of the traditional Shehechianu, right. But the Hebrew words of the traditional Shehechianu are part of my soul and are part of my family's tradition at every event. So I have made a choice to embrace what is important to me. And I think that that's fundamental to the humanistic Jewish approach. That if you're going to do something or say something, you do it with meaning and with purpose. Now, someone could say yes, but, and argue with me over it, and that's fine. We could get into that, and that would be no problem. I'd be happy to have that conversation. But I still think that one of the very important things we do as a community is help to identify those connections that are meaningful to us, and help to support those connections so that they stay strong. So we may be inconsistent at times.
Well, humans are nothing if not inconsistent and ambivalent. There's one thing I've learned as a therapist for 25 years is that humans exist in a state of ambivalence. And I think that, yes. So I appreciate you bringing that up. There is something very comforting with the Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu blah, 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 blah. For people who grew up with that can be very comforting. And it's not wrong to be comforted by something that comforts you, right? We do have an alternate version of the Shehechianu that starts Baruch Kol Dor Vador, right? Blessed are all the generations who have, and then the rest is the same, who have brought us and sustained us, and and so so that's a choice people can make, right? You can keep a lot of it that is the same, changing the first part so that you can say it with integrity. But it's certainly, like you said, if the first part, which is blessing the deity, is the part that is comforting to you, then that's what comforts you. Yeah. I wonder if other people have thoughts about that.
ויעשה שלום, which
yeah.
referring to, is actually we not only change the beginning, we also change the end.
Yes.
So it's important to be, in that regard, we were consistent. So
okay, so do you want to, can you point out that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So it's not only יעשה שלום, which God will make peace.
Right.
עלינו, then we say עלינו ועל כל ישראל, and we say instead of על כל ישראל, say על כל העולם. Which means that we are consistent, and we are not just thinking about ourselves or on God. We are fully in that regard, I think we are very consistent, which is interesting. I don't know if everybody noticed that we changed not only the beginning, but both ends.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Yes, we did change from Israel to the world, right? To bring peace to the world. Yep. Thank you.
This issue comes up in other lapsed religions as well. And it's been observed that lapsed Catholics really miss the Latin Mass, not because they're not progressive, but because they loved the sound of it and the ambiance of hearing the Latin. And once they started saying it in English, they were a little bit repelled by what was being said. And I've had a similar experience with Hebrew. I'm okay. I can adon alone with the best of them. But, once I look at the words, and that's an important difference between, why can't nature just be God? You don't ask nature to do you favors. You don't ask nature to, maybe you do ask nature to heal the sick, but it's because you're going out and gathering your little magic herbs to do it, not because you're expecting a power and an intercession from nature into your life. I never opposed if somebody wanted to do the traditional Shechianu for themselves. I just, we kind of cut the line, drew the line at, sure, you can say whatever you want. You can pray if you want at your daughter's bat mitzvah, but you don't ask the congregation to join you. That was kind of our rule.
Right, and I think that that's a very humanistic approach is to say, no one can force you to say or do anything that you don't believe. And so, right, you think for yourself. And so, I think that if someone was asking me to do a ceremony and they wanted me to say some words that were not authentic to me, I would decline. I would say, maybe there's an aunt or uncle who can come up and do that part. And that would be perfectly acceptable to me, and I think to everybody else in a inclusive community like ours. I'm trying to think that's kind of everything I wanted to cover in a nutshell. I guess I'd like to ask people if they feel that they are armed with language and words to go out into the world now, and to be able to say with positivity what they believe and what they stand for, and what kind of a Jew are you. Anyone?
Just an idea. Could we end it when you want to end it? With everybody just goes around and says one word.
Okay.
Sort of, in the classroom would be, standing in a circle, but here.
Oh, goodness, Rick, you want me to sum up my Jewish identity with one word?
You can have two or three, but it costs an extra $1. So.
They cost me money. All right.
Goes in the general fund.
I'm sorry, I don't know your name because it says Folkshow.
Oh, I'm Kate Forrest. I'm sorry, you came a little late. Yeah.
Yes, I could have sworn it started at 7. Anyway,
that's all right.
I am also a member of the Free Thought Society,
mm-hmm.
And when we were coming up with programming ideas, I said, maybe someone from Folk Show can come and talk about what secular Judaism is. And, you know, so I'm still looking for someone. I put it on Facebook.
Okay.
And, you know, if you think that you'd like to take that on, that would be awesome.
I'd be happy to.
Okay. Yeah. That would be just great. So we'll talk. Okay.
We'll talk.
Okay.
I'm frantically running through my mind how to encapsulate my, well, you know what, actually, I'm going to, hold on. Let's see. I'm going to share this PowerPoint a little bit, and let me see if I can, we went through these questions, and this is, I don't know if people know who Sherwin Wine is, but he was the founder of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, and what's currently called the Birmingham Temple. They're changing their name to something else soon, but we like to call it the Mothership, since it is the only congregation, only building built specifically to be a secular humanistic community. So they have their own building in their meeting space. They don't call it a sanctuary. Instead of an ark, they have the word Adam in the back, and they keep their Torah scroll in the library. It's a lovely library. I've been there. So this is what he came up with. You know, Judaism is the culture of the Jewish people, which includes many religious and secular traditions. A Jew is any person who chooses to identify with the Jewish people. After the Holocaust, it is clear that the meaning of Jewish history is that Jews must be responsible for their own fate. Every person is entitled to be the master of his or her own life. And the power to achieve human survival, happiness, and dignity is a human power. So he had a pretty succinct way of putting it. So, and then, you know, for me, I add again the thought from Felix Adler that when you bring out the best in others, you're bringing out the best in yourself. And that's a way for me to check myself and my actions that I do frequently fall short on, but at least it's a way for me to, a guiding principle to live my life by. And so, you know, my Jewish identity really comes down to being part of the history and future of the Jewish people, and knowing that that's, you know, that I take all the good and all the bad along with that. So, you know, if people have thoughts about this, or, you know, you know what, I really want to thank everyone for coming today. It was, it kind of snowballed into something much bigger than we had initially anticipated. And I know it's kind of, everyone has Zoom fatigue, and listening to one more presentation was, you know, heroic on all your parts. So I appreciate that. And, oh, thank you. And if you have questions, I'm lifecycles@folkshul.org. And this, I know this is being recorded. I don't know where we're uploading it to. Jen, do you have thoughts about what we're doing with it after it's recorded?
We can talk about it afterwards and figure out what's the most appropriate place.
Oh, see, some people are putting in schmaltz. Is the one word to describe your Jewish identity. Awesome. Awesome. I like that.
Kate.
Yes.
Kate. Mindy.
Yes, Mindy.
I see some names on here that I haven't seen before.
Okay.
So if anybody has a name, I mean, who I'm sure you had to find out about this somewhere else. But if you're not already on our email list, we'd like to put you on it.
Yeah, if you want to, you know, if you want to just send me a chat privately, you could give me your name and email, and I'll make sure that, because we'll be doing other presentations. adultcommunity@folkshul.org is another great way to get in touch with us. We'll be doing other presentations and workshops as we go forward, because we can, and it's a good option for us. Rick had that they tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. Awesome. Great. In a word, inclusive. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Pachutas.
It was a phrase.
Yeah. Yeah. Inclusive. That's great. Good. Oh, I want to put in a plug for our Shabbat in a box and our Rosh Hashanah in a box. I believe you can find them on our website. Is that true? But we are selling Shabbat in a box and Rosh Hashanah in a box. It's a way to bring the holidays home to you in the time when we can't be together. And each box has the dry ingredients for challah and secular humanistic blessings and candlesticks to decorate, and I think a challah cover to decorate, and some other goodies. And the Rosh Hashanah box has a kazoo instead of a shofar, and some pomegranate tea. And so please look for our Shabbat in a box and our Rosh Hashanah in a box, because we still want to celebrate even though we can't all be together. So yeah.
Those are not on the website at this moment, though we will be putting them up there. Anyone who's on the Facebook group should already have received that information. Also, if you want to be added to our mailing list, the mailing list, all you need to do is write to adultcommunity@folkshul.org, and we will get your information. We'll add you to the mailing list.
And that's a great way to also get your Shabbat in a box, your Rosh Hashanah in a box as well. Good. Anyway, everybody stay safe and healthy and well and sane and everything else in this cockamamie time that we are in. And thank you all for everything. Take care. Good night.
Thank you, Kate.
Good night.